as someone said, I work at the center from largely from, say, a livelihood perspective. Uh, I'm a psychiatrist. Uh, that's the day job, apart from all this stuff. So, can I just have the next slide, please? I just do a couple of quotes, what kind of got me going, and I suggest there's a couple of books that you might want to have a look at. The first one is from Richard Warner, who has written about recovery from schizophrenia in the political economy and how the broader outside political economy actually affects what happens to people with mental illness getting work and employment. And the second quote is from a book called Poor Economics by Abhijit Banerjee, which which is interesting because of the, actually a kind of counterintuitive suggestion there, which is that people who are poor do not necessarily want to become entrepreneurs. They really want a stable job. So, yes, that's what. Sorry. Yes, you agree. Yeah, and that they want stable jobs and not necessarily want to run their own businesses. And the whole push toward making them run businesses is not necessarily what they want to do. Um, so can I do it? Oh, you can't. Ah, okay. Okay. Okay, there are two or three models that I looked at largely from the policy perspective. Obviously, you've heard about sheltered employment, and there are many people doing sheltered employment. And then there is the individual placement and support. You heard from in the morning and in the afternoon a lot about train and place and train. So these are models which actually do exist. And I really wanted to get talking about what are called social cooperatives and social firms, because that's something where I think policy and legal impact, and given our environment, might be a place for us to work at. So I'll just run through quickly what is a social cooperative. See, this whole movement started off in Italy, and what is a social cooperative? Basically, Italy has a pretty good law for cooperatives to develop, and the similarities with India. If you worked in India, you realize that we have a very similar kind of policy and legal framework for cooperatives. What the Italians actually did, which is really interesting, was they created a category called B cooperatives. If I can have the next slide, please. Um, and what B cooperatives are is they have at least 30% of members who should be disadvantaged in some way. And what they have defined disadvantage is largely people with disabilities. And so type B cooperatives actually get very special preferences, and I'll come back to what those special preferences are. Can I have the next slide, please? And if you look at type B cooperatives in Italy, the largest proportion of people who are disadvantaged members in these cooperatives are people with mental health problems. Almost 41% of their members tend to be that. And what do these cooperatives follow a principle of? That they actually remain small, intentionally remain small. They don't try to become big. The idea is to maintain your social ties within the organization, because then you know everyone else in the organization. The other thing is that there is a good, high degree of participation. So people who are members of the cooperative actually run the cooperative. In a sense, they are owners of the thing. They're not workers in a place which is owned by someone else. And I thought that territoriality was a very useful thing. They only work in local regions, so they maintain their links with that community. So they don't start working across the country, and they actually make a whole thing about not going national or regional, but will actually only work locally. Uh, and one of the main activities that social cooperatives do in Italy, which is so interesting, is that they're largely involved in these kind of services: handicrafts, manufacturing, cleaning, garden maintenance, etc. And who are their customers? Who buys from these social cooperatives? Their customers, because 60% of who they sell to is the private sector, and 35% happens to be municipalities. And I'll come to why municipalities are actually buying from them, and why private sector does buy from them. And Trieste is the place which really started off this whole process. And in Trieste, for example, there are currently 13 Type B social cooperatives with 651 members, of whom about 255 are people who have mental disabilities, and they turn over around 10 million euros every year through these businesses. So these are very well established small businesses which do pretty well. And the next one. See, the single most factor is the incentives that are there. In Italy, there is like the PWD Act here. Italy has a affirmative action law, which means that 7% of all employees in organizations have to be disabled people or people who are disadvantaged groups. Now, what they did was, I thought so interesting, was they said, you don't necessarily have to employ these 7 people if you purchase from the B cooperatives. So if you source everything from the B cooperatives, which have people who have disabilities, then you fulfill your affirmative action mandate. It's a small policy tweak, but actually I think can make a huge change, because in the Indian context, the repeated thing you hear is that while PWD acts as 3% reservation for people with disabilities, many of these posts are never filled. And because they say we don't find the appropriate person, people don't last. But here is a way of actually using that affirmative action for something useful. Can I have the next one, please? And then there are other taxation incentives which also help. B cooperatives pay very low rate of VAT. So 4% VAT versus 20% what other businesses pay. So there is an incentive for the purchasers to also purchase from these cooperatives. Another example from UK. All these examples are largely, because they're largely based in Europe. There is little from Northern America, but mainly in Europe. In UK, they didn't go down the cooperative route. UK being far more capitalist in its orientation maybe than the rest of Europe. In UK, they have something called as social firms, which are similar to cooperatives, except that they tend to be owned by individuals or group of individuals. So they're actually firms, which again here more than 25% have to be disadvantaged people. And what you have with social firms in the UK is the sector is growing. The sector has grown 32% in the last 5 years. Now that's interesting in a time when there is economic downturn and the rest of the sectors are actually doing poorly. So you have a sector which is actually growing. Supporting people with mental illness has been the largest group who are supported through these social firms. Yeah. See, this is a breakdown of who works in these social firms, and you'll notice that people with mental health problems alone are 20%, but people with mental health and learning disabilities are another 25%, and learning disability alone is 15%. So about 60% of people actually are people with either mental health or intellectual disabilities who work in these firms. Yeah. This is the number for 2010 from social firms from UK. Around 1798 posts in full-time posts and about 850 people employed, and the total turnover of the sector is around 83 million pounds. And the kind of businesses they are involved in, training and grounds maintenance, catering, these are very popular kind of businesses they get involved in. I'm going to end the presentation with just some examples. This is my favorite example. Italy in 1978, in 1980 I think, passed a law called Law 178, which basically meant that all mental hospitals were shut down. So they closed every single mental hospital, and mental health care will only be provided through community centers. And this is in Trieste, where one of the old buildings was converted into a cafe, and it's actually run by the people who used to live in that mental hospital before it was shut down. I would love to go and have the coffee there. I'll give you another example. Greece. This is an example from Greece, because Greece is getting into the social cooperatives. They've actually passed their legislation to allow the kind of Italian-style cooperatives to come up. And so they produce craft products, they sell it in their own store. At the moment, they're only employing 10 people. Yeah. This is another example of Greece largely involved with agricultural products. And what is so differently distinct from cooperatives and social cooperatives is the fact that by mandating that only a limited number of people with disabilities, you don't have everyone who has disabilities, something that you were talking about earlier. There's only a small number of people with disabilities, and you're working with other people who do not have disabilities. This I thought was a very good example from the UK, which what it does is if you want to get rid of your furniture, it will come and collect your furniture, and it will try and give the furniture off to other disabled people, to disadvantaged groups, and they employ people to do that, and the people whom they employ are disabled people, and it's a good way of actually doing a lot of good. You know, you kind of I can see lots of benefits, and they have around 26 people, and out of the 26, 10 are classed as severely disadvantaged in the job market. This is a Canadian example. They run a food co-op, mental illness survivors running a food cooperative. So there are lots of examples of how cooperative structures work across countries. So I'll just quickly finish what I see as advantages. The main advantage is it helps to mainstream people with mental health problems. So they're working in a standard kind of employment setting with other people who do not have disabilities. It helps social integration because a lot of the misconceptions and the myths and the stigma around mental illness can actually get addressed by having people integrated into these firms. And self-esteem is a big thing. And I put a question mark on whether these things are suited for Indian condition, more as a question mark for myself. But I do think, given that we have a very strong cooperative movement in our country anyway, I mean, Gujarat and Maharashtra have led the whole cooperative movement, and it could easily be adapted with a few policy and law changes. I think the policy changes which will be required is things like grants and creating a special category for these cooperatives for people with disabilities. And legal changes will always be required, may be required. Like for example, the Italian example where affirmative action jobs could be done by purchasing from type B cooperatives will require a change to the law of some kind so that you can do that. Taxation benefits might be required. So obviously you need a lot of policy and law changes to also happen if you want to actually ensure this to happen. And you need to involve private sector associations. For example, a dialogue with the FISI or with, in Maharashtra, it's the Maharashtra Chamber of Commerce, having some kind of dialogue with these organizations so that you can actually get it going. One of the, an example of a good co-op, this is just my idea of something that is easily doable. I was talking to Akhileshwar. The market for psychotropic medications. Psychotropic medications are basically medicines taken by people with mental health problems. It is one of the largest growing markets in India. Every pharmaceutical company gets into the psychotropic market. I think the psychotropic market in India is worth close to about 15 or 20,000 crores. I've spoken to a few companies, and what I found out from them was that the retailer margin, as in how much the retailer makes, is 20% as a standard and can go up to 35%. And I think it might be a worthwhile thing to think of having a mental health co-op which is actually owned by people with mental illness. And there's two benefits. One is you generate employment for people with mental illness because they can work in the pharmacy. And at the same time, if they're purchasing from pharmacy and there are profits which the cooperative distributes to itself, then they actually get some reduction in their cost of the spend that goes on drugs. It's just an example, just a thought to leave you with. Not that I'm saying this is going to work or this is perfect, but I felt that sometimes you need to actually put some examples together to make sense of what is going on. I think that is really the end of it. I didn't have a lot to say. Thank you for being patient in the evening.
Whose assistant takes the orders for the medicine, and the medicine is supplied at 15% discount by the medicine fund and
No, like I said, I think that we could think, it's a good idea to think of initiatives that NGO organizations can do, we also need to think of what kind of policy and legal changes could be done to actually assist organizations which are working and trying to provide people with employment opportunity.
Just think, there's something like how you have an SHG in India, you do have 100% disabled SHGs who do have some of the tax benefits that you mentioned, but it's not like what you said the social firm as a percentage is disabled and everybody else isn't. This is 100% disabled, and then you get your benefits.
That's what I mean. Some of these things we need to tweak those things. Otherwise, you will not get that tax benefit if you're not having 100% members with SHGs.
I'd be interested in what the group feels. A few countries, I don't know right now which exactly, have a policy of in case they cannot meet, let's say a company cannot meet the 3% quota or whatever quota it is in their country, they're supposed to reimburse you. And they do.
The National Dairy Development Board, which basically has the biggest and the widest experience in cooperative development, and they work with the entire milk revolution in Gujarat is led with that, and they have an interest in developing more cooperatives. So I'm going to try and see if we can get them interested. I know that the government, at least some parts of the government are interested, so hopefully we'll get some conversation going. I'm not saying it will happen or Lijjat Papad, Seva in Ahmedabad.
Women's groups can come together and they then get access to a larger grant from the government, and that is to enhance the skills, that is to enhance the entrepreneurship among the women. I think it is quite eminently possible that women with mental health issues can come together, form cooperatives, and work through that processes. This is a new program that is on, and I think we could easily talk to Mr. Vijay Kumar, the mission director, who one can look at it. But I think the second problem with second issues with this model of cooperatives is that the quality of products. What kind of products, what's the quality, how can it compete in the current context? I think that becomes a major problem, because many of our institutions, we buy from, most of the products in TIS are sourced from disadvantaged groups, but it's a big problem to get good quality. I think how do we get that? We need a large structure, a large support system in order to help that initiatives. I think this is where it's going to be important.
There actually was a review of a slew of very diverse ideas, very diverse models. Of course, there were some commonalities because the area is the same. All of these work, and all of these have evolved over time and are evolving to be better and better. All of these are NGO initiatives. This, I think that the very fact that, and these are not the only ones, for every one idea or model present here, I'm sure that there are 20 others which are actually also happening on the ground who are not here. So all this actually is a very good news in the sense that all of us know that public social sector is shrinking, well, if not shrinking, not expanding at the expected rate. In the mental health sector, I know that there are a whole range of innovative models. Some of them I have actually been exposed to in this seminar room only. But I know that there's a whole lot of small little initiatives, but very innovative, each one of them. And I think that that richness of the ideas is the real good news. Now, what is required, what I feel is to have a resource place where all these models can be accessed at one place. Whether it is in the form of a book, whether it is a website, whether it is a detailed directory type of thing. Now, the advantages of that, if all this information about all these new models in the mental health, in the disability, in the vocational field are available, all this information is available at one place, then students of policy like me, not actually policymakers like Sumitra, not just policy, the students of social work, students of mental health area, students of disability area, and researchers. There are a whole lot of people internationally doing research into these areas. And if they could access these models, it would result in they will be richer, and then it will, what will happen is that these models will get a lot of exposure, and a lot of exposure for such models means a lot of funding, and which is good.